What's going on, everybody? Big game for Miami. It's a big rivalry game at number 4, Florida State. We've got Matt Baker in here, covers college football for Tampa Bay Times, also an AP Top 25 voter. We're going to get into some of that. You've got Florida State this week, number 3. Let's get right into it, Matt. And I always appreciate you joining me here. As I was mentioned before we started, a true pro. So with great knowledge on both programs. I know you know both these teams, but simply put, with Florida State, just what makes Florida State's offense difficult to stop?
Everything is the short answer. First of all, it starts with Mike Norvell as head coach. I think he's an offensive genius. You go back to his career, and in particular, what he did at Memphis before he came to Florida State, where he would take mismatched players of all different shapes and sizes, figure out, okay, this is what this guy does best, and I'm going to maximize it. And it took a little bit to kind of get the talent where he needed it at Florida State, but we're seeing what he can do with it. Obviously, they've got an experienced quarterback in Jordan Travis, who's gotten better over his career. Go back to the 2020 game and how lost he and Florida State were, and put them where they are now. He's had a remarkable transformation. And then the players around him, Trey Benson and Lawrence Toafili are excellent running backs. The receiving core, I'm assuming Johnny Wilson and Keon Coleman are both going to play this week. We'll see if that's the case. But that's about as good a 1-2 punch as you're going to find in the country. The tight ends have gotten a lot better with Kyle Morlock coming from Shorter and Jaheim Bell coming from South Carolina. And then the offensive line. It was historically bad at the end of Jimbo Fisher and into the Willie Taggart era. I mean, seriously, historically bad. One of the worst Power 5 offensive lines in the country going back years. And it took a little bit of time, kind of like what we're seeing with Miami and how they're trying to build it. But Norvell got his guys in both through the high school ranks and developing them, and then also through the transfer portal to where now they're good, if not better than good. And that's a long way from where they were. So that's a long-winded answer, but Florida State's offense doesn't have a whole lot of weaknesses, and that's what makes them so good, to state the obvious.
Yeah, they're leading the conference in scoring points per game, nearly 40 a game, 9th overall in the country, 17th in total offense, 3rd in the ACC. Staying with Jordan, it's been fascinating for a lot of people around college football, watching his development from where he started his college career and where he is now. Just year over year with Jordan, and what you've seen this season with him. And again, the points are still piling up. The consistency of scoring has been really impressive watching it from afar. But Jordan in particular, maybe what he's doing well, what he's doing different, even from a year ago. Obviously, they had the big win over Miami 45-3 last year. So I think Miami fans, if they haven't seen Jordan this year, maybe what's a little different or maybe more improved with him, because the numbers are impressive. The 26 touchdowns, just the 2 picks.
Yeah, I think he's gotten better as a passer and as a thrower. I mean, we've seen over the years what he's been able to do with his legs. Obviously, we're talking about the Miami game here, but I go back to the Florida game last year where his legs were absolutely the difference. And Billy Napier said as much right after the game. And it's not just his ability to extend a play and his ability to avoid a sack or make a scramble. It's how he was able to, and again, in some of those games in particular, take what could have been a 5-yard loss, a 10-yard loss, and get 20 out of it, get 25 out of it. So make a negative into not just a positive, but a really nice positive. So that's been him in the past, and he can still do that. We saw that against Duke in particular. But he's gotten better as a thrower, where really Duke was the only time this year where he's had to do a ton with his legs. Then you look at what he's done the last 2 weeks with his receiving core that was very banged up, threw for 359 yards, which was a season high against Wake. Next week goes for 360, even better than that, against Pitt with his top 2 receivers out. So that to me is a sign of somebody who's growing as a passer. Just one other stat I'll throw out. His 19 touchdown passes have gone to 9 different players. That's pretty darn impressive. It speaks to the depth that Norvell has created. It speaks to him as a play caller and all that stuff. But that tells me that Jordan Travis is doing a really good job of, finding the open guy, taking what the defense gives him, all that boring cliche stuff. But that absolutely matters. That's a huge reason why the Noles are where they are right now.
Yeah, I was just looking at, as you were talking, Miami six different receivers on the season have caught touchdown passes, just in comparison. And I didn't break it down by quarterback there. Matt, you touched on Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson. The Johnny was already impressive, and now you bring in Keon and what he's been able to do. What do you think their status is after last week? And then also maybe, Miami from Miami's standpoint with their situation from a cornerback, they lose 2 corners last week, 2 of their 3 guys that play all the time. And Miami rolls out these corners that are right around 5'11", so not big size. Now they did, and you're familiar with Devontae Brown out of UCF. He's got more size. His brother, Damari Brown. So maybe they're going to go some size matchup things there. But kind of what's the latest with Keon and Johnny, and then the challenges for any defense in facing those two guys, because they're not just big guys.
Yeah, I expect them to play. We'll see if that happens. I know they've been at practice some, but we'll kind of see how it goes. Norvell's tight-lipped with injuries, as a lot of coaches are. But the challenges are, I mean, they're two really big guys, right? This is Captain Obvious here, but Wilson is every bit of 6'6", 6'7". Keon Coleman's 6'3", 6'4", and they can both jump. Keon Coleman in particular can run. I mean, he's an absolute top 15 pick. He's Blitnikoff finalist material, all that stuff. Johnny Wilson's been inconsistent over his career, just in terms of dropping passes. He'll make the circus catches and then drop some easy ones, but I think he's gotten better at that. So if those two are healthy, again, that's about as good a 1-2 punch as you're going to find in the country. And as you mentioned, with some of Miami's issues in the secondary, that could be absolute disaster, just because Norvell's so good kind of scratching where it itches, if that makes sense, as an offensive play caller. And if Miami's shorter or shorter on the field and then on the bench in terms of the secondary, this seems like it could be an absolute game where those guys kind of feast.
And I think, Miami's, they've got to get great play from a lot of guys on defense, but James Williams at safety, because of the situation, even if these guys play, we're not expecting, them to really roll out all these guys that got hurt. But James Williams, with his size, his athleticism, I think, we've heard and we've seen James kind of progressing throughout this season, his third year, highly regarded guy, 6'5" safety. And I think these are the games, big time players have to step up. And I think he's going to have a really good game, not just with tackling, but he's got to be able to defend and help these guys out and provide that big target, or at least blanket some of these guys to prevent them from really going off. So I think James, this is, such a big game for James. They really need him to step up, and Miami's got other guys on defense, certainly, to slow this thing down, to slow Jordan Travis down and pull this thing off. From Miami offensively, a struggle lately. We've been talking about it so much from here. Tyler Van Dyke in the passing game. One of the things all year to monitor, we've been monitoring the lack of a tight end production, and Florida State has Jaheim Bell. You touched on the other tight end. What are they getting from Kyle and Jaheim, and how much is that helping their offense? Because we haven't seen too many years since I've been covering Miami where they don't have production from a tight end, and I feel like it's really making a difference. And I really feel like it's kind of making the Miami offense easier to guard. And I think conversely, Florida State, with what they've got, you touch on the guys on the perimeter, but just having those guys in the tight end that they were able to go to as well, how much is that helping?
It helps a lot. It helps just in terms of the matchups, because Norvell is, again, such a really good matchup guy, where he's, over his career, he's found playmakers and figured out, what do I need to do to put them in position to make plays? And Jaheim Bell's a really good example of that. We saw flashes of it when he was at South Carolina, but Norvell's been able to do more with him, just in terms of putting him at different positions, having him run the ball on occasion, as he did against LSU. That type of stuff, just to maximize his ability and get him in a position where he's against somebody that can't defend him. When you look at, you're exactly right about Miami's kind of issues at tight end, but it was that way the last couple of years at Florida State, where their tight end production was meh, to be polite, I suppose. And that's why it was such a big focus for Norvell this offseason to bring in these guys. Because, when you looked at Florida State last year, they weren't very good in short yardage situations. They weren't good enough in the red zone. And this year, they're one of the best red zone teams in the country. And one reason why is they've got the tight ends who can block, who can go out and catch passes. And that just gives you more options as a play caller.
The offensive line, going back to that, you said that it's improved over the last few years. Where it's at now with the running backs, Miami wants to be physical. They want to pride themselves on being physical. It's been interesting watching Miami over the last few weeks, how they've kind of played their defensive line. Sometimes, they're going with three guys out there, kind of mixing things up. Ruben Bain is a really impressive player. And as much as we talk about James Williams, his talent's showing up. I know it's a lot of pressure on Ruben as a true freshman, but he doesn't look like a true freshman out there. And I think he's going to have a big game too. And from a Miami standpoint, I wish, that they had a Nakeem Mesidor, a Nigel Lee Kelly, but they've been playing weeks without these two guys on the D line, trying to figure things out. They like what they have, and maybe a Branson Dean kind of being a piece guy, but also Leonard Taylor. He's another guy in these big games. You've got to have guys like this really step up, but kind of Miami wants to be physical on their defensive line, offensive line for Florida State. How would you kind of evaluate it, mixing in that run game? Because things have been working well for Florida State, not just throwing the ball, but you're not getting 500 yards total offense these last couple of weeks just throwing the ball. They're mixing in that run, and it's been surely effective.
Yeah, I think Florida State's run game can get better. I think they can get more explosive than what we've seen so far. And again, there's been flashes with Lawrence Toafili and Trey Benson had the 200 yards against Virginia Tech. So we've seen it in spurts, but the run game I don't think has been quite as consistent as I would have expected kind of going into the year. And then if we're kind of nitpicking Florida State as a whole a little bit, their pass protection's not great. So that's an avenue where if Miami's defense can get some pressure, maybe it's, Leonard Taylor in the middle more, or Ruben Bain kind of doing what he's done the last couple of games. If they're able to kind of get some pressure there, I think that's one way as we kind of look at how can Miami keep this closer or pull an upset. That's one matchup that I don't think is like a slam dunk for Florida State.